Dann würde ich jetzt ganz, ganz herzlich begrüßen wollen Benedikt Januar, der extra aus Brüssel zu uns gekommen ist. Kommen Sie gerne auf die Bühne. Da möchte ich auch einen kleinen Begrüßungsapplaus, bitte. Herr Januar ist, wenn ich das richtig recherchiert habe, eigentlich von Hause aus Biologe, aber vor allem Politiker und war schon Abgeordneter im ungarischen Parlament, aber eben auch lange in Europa. Und zwar für eine Partei, die ich auf Ungarisch auf gar keinen Fall aussprechen kann. Und ich bin ganz beruhigt, dass es dafür deutsche Übersetzungen gibt. Die eine lautet Dialog, die andere lautet die Grüne Partei. Also da kann man dann die politische Zuordnung schon vornehmen. Er ist auch Mitglied der NGO Protect the Future und leitet derzeit die Vertretung Budapests in Brüssel. Und das wäre dann auch meine erste Frage, weil das ist natürlich etwas Besonderes, wenn man sozusagen eine Stadt repräsentiert in Brüssel. Was ist dort sozusagen Ihre Aufgabe? Was tun Sie für Budapest in Brüssel und was tut Brüssel vielleicht auch für Budapest mit Ihrer Hilfe?
Hello, good evening, everybody. I'm sorry for speaking in English. My German is rather limited to beer-related topics, so it's better to speak in English. Thank you very much for the invitation to Hanover today. I'm really happy, and let me to convey the greetings of the Mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karácsony. Budapest has a representation office in Brussels for more than 20 years now, basically since Hungary joined the European Union. And it's not a unique thing. Most of the European capital cities are having representation offices in Brussels to the EU, as do most of the European regions. And just earlier this week, I had the opportunity to meet the deputy director of the representation of Lower Saxony in Brussels. So we are keeping in touch with other representation offices as well. Of course, what a representation office is doing in Brussels, it depends very much on what are the priorities of the individual cities or regions. And there are some which concentrate more on cultural diplomacy or tourism, or just to follow up European decision-making. There are many regulatory procedures in the European Union which affect city or regional competencies, like when they discuss, I don't know, the drinking water directive. The city of Budapest, which owns the drinking water company in Budapest, of course, is directly affected. So it's good to know that what is in the pipeline, what is happening in Brussels, to be prepared, and also to lobby if there are some specific interests of a city or a region which should be incorporated in the European decision-making system. But for Budapest, for obvious reasons, the most important thing in the past 5 years, since I'm in Brussels heading this representation office, and since Mayor Gergely Karácsony, as a Green Mayor in Central and Eastern Europe, not the only one, but the first one who was elected as a Green Mayor in a major city in Central and Eastern Europe, was elected in 2019, is to build up a strong relationship with the European institutions, and this is important to get additional funding for the city. As you may imagine, an opposition mayor in Hungary not necessarily has the most smooth and peaceful relationship with the government. Which unfortunately in Hungary doesn't mean simply that there are political conflicts, or in the governmental media, which was quite well described by the correspondent from Vienna, that in the governmental media there are hate-mongering campaigns against the mayor, but also the government started to cut back heavily the financing of the city, to cut back taxes collected by the city, and also they tried to exclude Budapest as a city from European funding. So the most important issue in the past 5 years for Budapest was to make the European decision makers understood how difficult situation the city is and what the city really needs from the European institutions to survive in this critical and hostile environment of Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Und ist das, Entschuldigung, wir müssen immer eine kleine Pause machen. Und ist das Verständnis da bei der EU für diesen für diese besondere Situation, in der Budapest ist, oder müssen Sie da auch noch viel Erklärungen liefern, immer und immer wieder die Situation deutlich machen, oder haben sich da schon Allianzen sozusagen gebildet, auf die Sie sich verlassen können?
Well, the European institutions and Europe, the European Union is really like a huge oil tanker. It goes ahead and perhaps they start to turn the wheel at Dakar to turn into the Strait of Gibraltar. So in Europe, everything happens in a slow way. And that was the case with Hungary in general. So it needed 9-10 years till in Europe and in the European capitals, they understood what's going on in Hungary, in spite of the fact that we tried to explain very intensively from an early stage that it's dangerous what is going in Hungary. And we also tried to explain that it's not a Hungary problem. You cannot manage it as this is some exotic country having some strange problems. We do not have it in Europe. It's a European problem, and not only because it creates problems for Europe, it creates, just remember how difficult decision-making regarding the support of Ukraine is because of the repeated Hungarian vetoes, but also because it's a European problem, because what is happening in Hungary is not kept in Hungary. It's disseminated. And again, the journalist from Vienna explained it quite well. What's going on in Austria? Herbert Kickl, FPÖ, he learns from Viktor Orban, he learns from Hungary. But that was the case with the previous Polish government. Jarosław Kaczynski's PiS party was copy-pasting what was happening before in Hungary. Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, keeping his eyes on Viktor Orban and tries to copy what he sees that works well in Hungary. So it's becoming a more and more European problem, and I think that after and I don't want to touch too much German domestic politics, but what happened last weekend, I think it raises some concerns that where we are in Germany. So this is to say that what happened in Hungary in the past 15 years, it's not simply a Hungary problem, but Europe and many European governments understood this in a very slow way. And that was a little bit similar with the situation of Budapest as capital, because after 2019, very soon we realized that there is an open war by the government against the city, and we are having serious problems. And we went to the Commission explaining that, look, you are discussing with the Hungarian government 2021-2027 multi-annual financial framework, basically the EU budget, where Hungary submits its national programs, how to use this money, and we see that this is designed in a way to exclude the city out of this European funding. It's a problem, and it's a risk for us, how to survive. But for the first side, they told us that, no, we have a good cooperation with the Hungarian government, and we will keep our eyes on the developments. No, not really. It's not a serious problem. You are perhaps hysterical, and you shouldn't worry too much. In the meantime, the general relationship between the EU institutions and the Hungarian government has been shifted very heavily, especially since the beginning of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, when Hungary quite openly started to support Russia. And by now, it's not a rule of law problem or a corruption problem, which, to be honest, they don't like it in Brussels, but they don't believe that it's a fundamental problem. But it has become a fundamental European security problem, that Hungary is threatening the security of Europe because it cooperates with Russia, and there are some measures which make an easy way to Russian agents to infiltrate to the European Union and so forth and so on. Which of course raised a lot of concerns in the European institutions, and it helped us in a way to make them understood what is the magnitude of the problem we are having. And by now, I must say that we have a very good cooperation with the European institutions, and in the past 5 years we were able to convince them on a lot of things, for example, not to adopt national development programs which exclude the capital city out of EU funding. Close to annual budget of the city is now at least on paper targeting the city of Budapest. If it will be paid or not, it's the next question, and that's the future and the future work for us to keep our eyes on it. But we were really able to get some development funding for the city. So now they understand it quite well, and they also understand that this is not simply the problem of Budapest. Besides of the formulation of the new European Commission, also there are intensive discussions regarding the post-2027 multi-annual financial framework EU budget. And by now we are, I would say that on a daily basis we are in touch with the Commission to make the next budget much more safe from the perspective of political discrimination, so how to prevent, and it's not only Hungary. Cities in Italy are complaining, cities in Slovakia are complaining that they have problems with the national government, and quite surprisingly last week I was approached by some Dutch cities, I would rather not mention names, and they asked me to meet, to learn how to survive in a hostile political environment, which is quite sad in a way. And I really didn't plan to be the man in Europe who can advise cities how to survive this kind of political oppression. But that's the situation, and now already the European decision makers realized that there is a systemic and European level problem with that. So we try to participate in the preparation of the next budget to make it, how to say, autocratarian safe or autocratarian proof budget, and also to better support cities as local level governments in the EU, not only because of the rule of law and the political problems, but also because of other considerations, because cities are in the heart of many joint European actions and targets in climate action, in digitalization, in social inclusion, in migration policy, and so on and so forth. So it makes sense that cities should receive, and it's not only Budapest, but also Hanover would receive more attention from Europe if there would be a more strategic alliance with cities, between cities and the European institutions, perhaps with targeted funding for cities to tackle those challenges they are facing with, and where the European Union, just on climate action, 80% of the European greenhouse gas emission comes from cities. So if the EU meets its own climate targets, it depends on how cities perform. For this, cities need much more cooperation for the European institutions, and I think that this is, by now, is understood, and the cooperation with the European institutions is really very good, and we have a very strong cooperation to find solutions for all the problems we have.
Ja, das ist wirklich eine beeindruckende Schilderung oder auch eine erschreckende. Das ist ja sowieso ein bisschen überraschend, wenn man sich das so anguckt, wie Sie das selber beschrieben haben. Ein grüner Bürgermeister in Ungarns Hauptstadt, der sich jetzt geradezu feindlich bedroht von der ungarischen Viktor-Orban-Regierung sieht. Wie kann man das überhaupt erklären, dass Budapest einen grünen Bürgermeister gewählt hat? Also in Deutschland wird viel über den Stadt-Land-Kontrast gesprochen, da bei uns auch in den Städten häufig sehr anders gewählt wird als in ländlichen Gegenden und die Menschen auch andere Themen umtreiben. Kann man das für Ungarn auch so sagen? Ist da so diese Wahl überhaupt zu erklären?
Yes, I think that it's a general phenomenon, and it's not only in Hungary. Well, after the European elections this June, I just had a look on the German electoral map. Blue on the east, black on the west, with green dots in the big cities. So seemingly, and it's not only Germany, it's in most of the European member states. Yes, cities, and I think that cities are more and more important in Europe, and not only because they are engines of European economy, or not only because they are generally more progressive politically, but the population in the big cities is much more open to pro-European political stances as well. So for Europe as such, I think that cities represent a very important fundamental resource to keep alive its credibility and support in Europe. And that's the case in Hungary. So in Budapest was always multicultural, progressive, city back in the dualistic period of Austria-Hungary as well, and it still is. So the population of Budapest is absolutely progressive, but not only in Budapest. I would say that also in the bigger cities in the countryside, big cities. In Hungary, a city with 200,000 inhabitants, it's a big city. They are much more progressive, and in fact, in 2019 October, when we had the local elections, not only Budapest was won by a Green mayor, who is Green, but the coalition behind him is very colorful coalition. So with socialists, liberals, Greens, even a joke party was supporting him. So it's a quite colorful coalition. But also half of the big cities in the countryside was won by the opposition, either as a mayor or a majority in the city council. So also in the countryside, the cities are much more progressive. The countryside, the villages, the rural areas are much more conservative. Due to different reasons, and of course it has some historical background, but also, again, referring back to the previous, or the journalist's contribution, that in the countryside, most of the people, they just consume governmental media. So the public service media is completely a propaganda channel. These regional newspapers and media controlled by completely controlled by the government, and they read and see, watch and listen to these kind of sources. And as the media is under a strong governmental control, and it repeats and repeats the governmental messages and propaganda, of course it can convince people who do not have any other information that we live in the best possible world in Hungary and the rest of Europe is dying. And they truly believe this in a way, keeping also in mind that the reason why the Fidesz government and Prime Minister Orban maintained its popularity in the population is also partly due to a good timing. Mr. Orban was really very lucky in a way that he arrived to power in a period which was an unprecedentedly economically advantageous period of global economy. Basically, after the economic crisis of 2008-9, there were more than 10 years of continuous economic growth, abundance of capital, money, investments, everything. This was coupled with enormous amount of EU funding. You mentioned it, that and some years it went up to 4-5% of the Hungarian GDP. And it really created a modest, but still existing, development for the daily lives of the people. It was perhaps not so strong as other countries in the neighborhood, because the Hungarian government's economic and other policies were not really very successful. So Hungary, compared to the other Central and Eastern European countries, it was lagging behind. Now we are competing with Romania on GDP level, the country which was perhaps after Slovenia and the Czech Republic, the richest country of the region in 1989. But of course the people, the people of the countryside, they don't go to Romania, or they don't read statistics. What they personally experienced, that there is a kind of modest development in their daily lives. And this was enough to stabilize the power. And now, as Hungary is in a deep economic crisis, first with the COVID, it's not a Hungary problem. Then with the war in Ukraine, it's partly a Hungarian problem because we are much more dependent on, for example, on Russian energy sources than other countries. So what is happening with Russian energy sources hits very heavily Hungary. But now the economic situation is really quite worrying. And surprisingly, this is the moment when a new political force is emerging, which is already close to 40%. It's closing to the public support of the Fidesz party without offering anything really new compared to previous opposition parties. So it's not because they are much better or they knew it better or they have something special offered to the people, just they arrived again in the right moment when this comparatively, or in Hungarian terms, peaceful years of developments are over. And I think that in the coming years, the Hungarian government is facing with serious problems, not only in the economy, but also in the political sphere. The problem for us as Budapest, that of course the economic difficulties hit us as well. So on top of the governmental measures to cut the sources of the city, we suffered a lot from the COVID crisis, and also we are going to suffer if there are general economic problems in the country. One, and the other factor that normally, and in this sense, the Orban regime is nothing special. It's a general autocratic regime, as you see many of them all over the world. How they react to problems? Normally to increase oppression. And that's what we expect, that with the emerging economic tension in the country, the autocratic or illiberal nature of the regime could be strengthened, and some of the recently introduced elements also mentioned in previous contributions, like this sovereignty protection office and some other issues, they are already signs of this further illiberalization or further autocratization of the system. We will see, of course, but Unfortunately, I cannot conclude to a very optimistic outcome at the end of this. I think that we are facing with quite challenging times in the future as a country and also as a city. But the mayor was still re-elected in June when we had the local elections together with the European elections, and with a very slight majority still. And mayor was a bit disappointed, but I told him that in fact, taking into consideration all what we had in the past 5 years, all the pressure from the governmental side, all the financial cuts, and all the challenges we had, I believe that it's already a kind of miracle that he's still there. He was re-elected, and we are ready to continue and to maintain Budapest as an island of freedom and liberty in Hungary. And we hope that it could be in the future also a starting point to re-democratize Hungary and to lead it back to the family of democratic European nations.
Wir hätten zwar rein theoretisch noch 5 Minuten, aber ich finde, das war jetzt so ein gutes Schlussstatement und ich kann jetzt, glaube ich würde jetzt gar keine Frage mehr stellen wollen, sondern ich glaube stellvertretend für alle, die jetzt hier auch im Raum sind, Ihnen dabei wirklich nur alles Gute wünschen. Und ich habe mitgenommen, unter anderem von diesem Gespräch, dass ich unbedingt auch mal wieder nach Budapest fahren möchte, weil ich war ewig nicht mehr da. Und diesen Hort, wie Sie ihn beschrieben haben, der Freiheit, des Fortschritts und dem Versuch, die Modernität aufrechtzuerhalten, auch nochmal wieder zu sehen als Touristin, und drücke Ihnen wirklich alle Daumen und ja, ich hoffe, dass das in Europa mit der Unterstützung auch bleibt.